Good afternoon. Welcome back to the final session on the fourth day of IST-Africa 2022. My name is Miriam Cunningham. This session is focused on societal implications of technology. So the first presentation by Ola is focused on SignSupport, an emergency mobile application for the deaf.
Good day, everyone. My name is Semandi Tobide. The co-authors are William Tucker and Olasupo Ajayi. My presentation topic is SignSupport, an emergency mobile application for deaf. So we know that deaf individuals are people living with some certain hearing loss, and then they use sign language to communicate. So for this, their means of communication is using the sign language, and it is heavily based on vision. And the capital D for deaf people denotes people whose primary language is the sign language. So if the capital D is used to describe a person, it means that the person's primary communication language is sign language. And then most emergency service contact numbers that we have now and that we have currently are voice-based, and which makes this service very difficult for the deaf people to use. So I'll be giving an illustrative description of what the problem here is. So I denote a hearing individual and with an individual X, and then the deaf person with Y. In this case, both individuals were involved in two unrelated road accidents, and they both require emergency service. While the deaf person, the hearing person will put a call through to the emergency service provider and get help because they can describe their situation and then give them the location and address. The deaf person would have to find someone to assist, or other services that are available are based on text messaging during this. And we know that at this point of emergency where you need to get quick response to avoid more disaster or avoid the situation getting worse, you need to communicate instantly with EMS for them to provide service for you. So if you have to use a text message, what if one of the deaf person's aunt or is involved in the accident? Like, it is really difficult for the deaf person to start texting at that point where you need to request for help. And then an argument could be that they could use a video call. The same thing with the text messaging is that you also need to use your two hands and your facial expression, including body gestures, to sign at that point of accident to explain your situation. So this makes it difficult in such incident for a deaf person to relay their complaint, for them to get the service which is provided to every citizen. The aim of this research is to fill this niche, and to develop a solution that will enable deaf people to communicate during emergencies. The specific contribution we are giving here is to provide a mobile application that enables the deaf to communicate and get help from emergency services at all time. And then, unlike most other apps that we have, SignSupport would incorporate first aid videos, video guides, so it will be subtitled in English, and also the videos will be based on sign language, so a deaf person can assist another deaf person, and someone who can read can also assist another deaf person understand what the first aid videos are talking about. So we have some related works here that are people who have worked on something similar, translating sign language to English and other languages like Arabic, and then the other way around, like translating English to Arabic and Arabic to English, and then using some embedded sensors into gloves to detect and interpret hand gestures. But what about the face? And yeah, so all the services are available, but they need to be put together and try to make it work during an emergency. So the research approach and methodology, a co-design method was implemented for this research, which involves the deaf community, the emergency service provider, sign language professionals, and then the research team. So we were able to work together and then come up with a working prototype for the SignSupport for emergency application. And then the unit testing and then acceptance testing were done. So we have like 4 phases of iteration during this project. The first phase, which we come up with a wireframe using just a mind software to come up with the first prototype. The second phase, where we move to Adobe XD and then integrated WhatsApp and have a different UI. Also, we started planning on the recording of sign language, first aid videos at this stage. Then in the third phase, we started doing the coding of the app and the database, every other APIs that were needed. We started working on that to put everything together. And the final stage, we have all the details of the person's history and their personal contacts, the emergency contacts, their details, so that we can put all together and add colors, make the interface look better and have a better product at the end. So this is a screenshot of the first prototype we have. After taking this out to the deaf community, they have an idea, they have a clearer vision of what we are planning to do, to have the login page, to have them be able to request for the police case, emergency, fire service, and medical. So we have another category here which we didn't know if it was going to be included or not, and the videos are not yet ready for us to put in here. So the request page, which is this, is displayed this way. It sends the code, the location code, longitude and latitude to the emergency service, and then the person can, at the AMS, can just get this and click on to know the location of the person requesting for either police, fire, or medical assistance. So at the second phase, we were able to come up with better colors. We have moved at this stage to using Adobe XD. So we came up with a better interface, a better UI, and then the request page was also redesigned. So it shows your address while you click on Get Help. And we have some videos already pre-recorded here, few videos at this stage. So if you request help, it sends your location and then the kind of emergency you are requesting for. And you can also add a little details. Also, the manual button down here, below here, would allow the person just get a link to WhatsApp and send the message directly to the EMS. Yeah, so the manual part is for a breakout of the WhatsApp, which we included at this stage. So the third phase, we had a much better interface because we got feedbacks from both our domain experts and the deaf community saying they want colors, they want something that would be more visual and speaks even before they read the text. So we had to bring in the new pictures, the police, the fire, medical, and the videos as well to show that you can perform the first aid on someone who is in an emergency before the emergency service providers arrive. So on the second screen where you had the additional details, you can also seek help for a friend. At this stage, you realize that the WhatsApp breakout was giving a lot of errors and wasn't going to be well visible to leave that in the app. So we had to take that out and focus on how the emergency service, the request will be sent to the deaf contact center. And then from there, it is being relayed to the emergency service. All this could be done in a matter of seconds, and the request will be sent to the emergency service for help to get to the person, to the deaf person. So this is the final phase where we had to put in all the forms. If you log into the SignSupport for Emergency app, you would put in your personal details, your medical record, your emergency contacts, and your medical history, and all of your details. If you are on medical aid, if you have a contract or something that would assist you get help immediately. So this is the final phase that we came up with, which concluded the app at the stage where we covered virtually everything that the domain expert and the participant, the deaf community were expecting. So finally, we came up with this system architecture. At the beginning stage, we have various architectures that were coming from. Remember, some of them had the WhatsApp breakout in, and then it was much more complicated. So at the final stage, we had this system architecture, which the REST API has the database, the Google Place API, Google geocode API was sitting on the REST API, and the app also sits on the API, on the REST API. So this way you can send message from the app. It goes into the dev contact center. They get the messages and release it to the emergency center for the person to get help. So we did 2 types of testing, usability and acceptance testing. We had 9 members of the deaf community participate, and then 3 emergency service provider people who participated, who are the domain experts. So I denote the domain expert with the D and the participants with the P. So these are the feedbacks we get at some stage of the testing, of the usability testing, asking us to put in more colors, asking us to include the sign language videos, asking us to put in the get help button. They wanted to take them to the location page, and which were all the things we added at the end of the final phase. So the acceptance testing at the final phase also showed us that we tested for the user interface, which out of 9 people, we got 8 people giving us a very satisfied response. The app navigation, how was it? We got 8 out of 9 people giving us very satisfied response. And then the app responsiveness, we got 7 out of 9 people giving us a good response, that they are satisfied. And then video content, for the emergency request, the emergency request side, we got a 9 out of 9, that it was easy and simple to use. Then we asked if they would recommend the app for other deaf people, which we got a 8 out of 9, saying they would recommend this app for other deaf people to use. So in conclusion, although we have finally came up with an acceptable application for this, for the deaf people, and the stakeholders were pleased with the application at this stage, but we could also still incorporate some more other things like real life location tracking for the first responder and after emergency request has been made. And we could also enable victims send other details of their situation. We could also still, the platform could also support iOS and Microsoft operating system, because we used React Native to build the final product. So this could allow us use it on iOS, but we have only tried to work with the Android platform at this stage. So it could also be related to, could also be converted or be used on iOS and Microsoft operating system. And then the use of USSD, unstructured documentary service data, alongside with internet would also be an avenue to extend this work. So these are my references, and thank you. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for this presentation. So Ola, I've put the feedback into chat so you can see it as we're going through it. So this is a very interesting presentation, and it's interesting the demographic that it's targeting. So considering the demographic, I would appreciate if you could provide some insight into, are there many digital tools available for people with hearing impairment? How does the functionality of this app compare with other offerings, or you didn't find any other offerings doing this communication between hearing impaired and first responders? And why was it necessary to build this application from scratch?
Okay. Can you hear me for starters?
Yes, you're very clear.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Yes, indeed, there are other applications available that do something similar. A lot of them do exist globally. We had a session on a literature review, although it was skipped over. He was briefly discussed here, but yes, there are. The difference between ours and the typical ones that exist, after reviewing most that exist, we found out that they are emergency apps in general. They're not exactly targeted towards the deaf community. And as such, and like we said earlier, that the deaf community they communicate basically through visual means, in terms of the hand signal. So we thought to incorporate a form of we incorporated first aid videos. So one of the major differences between ours and every other solution out there is the incorporation of first aid videos in both English and sign support and sign language. So this means, should in a scenario, in an emergency scenario, another deaf person can actually perform first aid by just looking through the video, by viewing the video. Similarly, somebody who is not a deaf person, a hearing person, can actually go to the app and also help out, help with giving first aid. That's one critical difference between us, and one of the reasons why we built this. Now, you said something. The second question is about the deaf community.
Yeah, so if we could just spin that out a little bit further, right? So
okay.
It's very good that you have a clear differentiation. And
Yep.
Is there anything specific about either the type of content of the videos or the way it's displayed that would restrict the use of this application? So for example, could this application be used in other African member states, or there's something specific about the content or the focus that's South African based?
Okay. Generally, sign languages are, well, to a large extent, they are universal, but some of them, most of the time, they are also tailored to specific countries. So the language we use here is South African Sign Language. So it might not be a direct match to apply in a different country, because there are the slight variations in language, in sign language being spoken there. For example, some countries use the American Sign Language, which is relatively different from the South African Sign Language. So there might have to be some form of local adaptation for it to work in a different country, that where a different form of sign language is being used or is in use.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then the second question was, the presentation indicated that there was engagement with the deaf community, and for other researchers interested in engaging with this demographic, it would be very helpful if you could clarify who the application was validated with. So it's clear that you had 9 participants, but were these identified as individuals that the researchers knew? Were they representative of deaf associations? Were they students in the university? How was this engagement with the deaf community put in place? Okay,
so thanks. There were, as I stated, there were 3 different categories of participants or stakeholders. There was the Cape Town deaf community itself. So those were, we had members from the community. So we had about 9 different participants, including, we had some residents of the facility and some of the admin staff facility, because we also had to learn sign support, sign language. So we had to constantly go to the deaf community to learn some of these things. So we had 9 people from, we had members from there. Then for the other stakeholders, we had a representative from the fire department, the South African Police Department, and yeah, just two from the police department and 1 from fire department. So, and then the last category of stakeholders were subject matter experts. These are researchers who have published something similar or work in similar areas from the University of the Western Cape. So those are the 3 categories of community engagement or stakeholders that were involved in the project.
Yeah, and to identify these different people, so the person from the fire department, the person from the police department, and the people from the deaf community, were they based on personal relationships, or were they done through hierarchies, or were they done through associations? How did you actually get these people?
Okay, so we first of all got some medical clearance, and then went into the Cape Town deaf community. We didn't exactly know, we didn't know anybody on a personal basis there. We just introduced ourselves, and this was a project. So it's to start with, it's a part of this. This project is a part of a larger ongoing project. So we've kind of established a relationship with the deaf community over time. It's been since 2018. We've had this ongoing partnership with them. And so the initial interaction with them wasn't based on personal relationship. It was just, this was our project, this was the intended. As you see in phase 1, we just went there with sketches, pens and paper to describe what it is we wanted. And over time, we refined and refined based on their communication, based on their participation too, but we got the final result. But no, it's not from personal relationship.
Yeah, so you followed a co-design approach,
yes,
where you were
exactly,
interacting
yes,
with the demographic constantly during the application development. That's very good.
Yeah.
And then in terms of next steps, so now you have a 2nd or a 3rd generation app, and what happens now?
Okay, so what we're trying to do is there are a whole lot of, the next phase would incorporate, like she introduced or she pointed out, some of them would be cross-platform support for other platforms, because right now we're only using Android. So integration with other platforms would be key. Then one thing we noticed is we're specifically using the internet. Say by internet, we mean data connection or 3G or 4G on the phone. We're trying to see, this may not always be the case, especially sometimes in the out of data or things like that, and in emergency situation. So we thought to look at how we could incorporate USSD. That's, those are enhancements in terms of the app. Other enhancements could be, because there are also some form of things would like to, that there is, okay, so there's a bigger project that this is part of, and I don't know if I have, because of the ethical, I don't know if I can discuss some of those things here, but the ones I can discuss are the USSD incorporation and the operating system.
So the next steps are primarily technical modifications, and then you're not sure if there's a bigger project that this would move this out into being a live system.
Oh, there is, definitely there is. That's something that I don't, because we have, as at this time, I do not know the exact content of
yeah, of course,
ethical clearance, and
yeah.
I do not know if I'm allowed to disclose those kind of things. But at least for the app, the one I'm setting off, the technical enhancements would be the cross-platform support, yeah, and incorporation of USSD.
Thank you very much. Okay, I don't see any other questions for you in the chat. So I'd like to thank you and your co-authors for presenting this very interesting research, and wish you luck going forward. So now we're going to move to the next presentation.
Good day, everyone. My name is Katazo Amunkete.
So Katazo and Jude are going to present Accessibility Friendly, a case of Namibian online stores.
Good day, everyone. My name is Katazo Amunkete. I'm a lecturer at the Namibia University of Science and Technology. And today I'll be presenting on our paper titled Accessibility Friendly, a case of Namibian online stores. I co-authored this paper together with my colleague, Dr. Jude Osakwe, also from the Namibia University of Science and Technology, and we are both from the Faculty of Computing and Informatics. So the main objective of our paper was to look at the adherence to web accessibility guidelines by Namibian online stores and also their compatibility to assistive technologies. So web accessibility is defined as the ongoing process of helping web engineers ensure that members of the disabled community are able to gain access to the same electronic information or content as non-disabled people. And then assistive technologies are any devices, equipment, or systems that help an individual to perform tasks that would otherwise be difficult or near impossible to do. So those were the two terms that we looked at in our paper, looking at adherence to web accessibility guidelines, and then also looking at compatibility to assistive technologies by Namibian online stores. So the rest of the paper is structured as follows. We'll move on to the motivation for the paper. Then we'll look at the research objectives, the research approach that was followed, the results of our study, recommendations and impact, and then we'll finish off with conclusions and an outlook. The motivation for carrying out this study: we found that Namibia is reported to have about 98,413 people that are living with various disabilities. And given COVID-19, we found that online shopping had become the norm. Since most countries experience periods of lockdown, Namibia being one of those countries, and we believe that web accessibility is important for people living with disabilities, because web accessibility makes it easier for people living with disabilities to navigate websites that would otherwise be difficult to navigate. So for example, we could have features such as alternative text on images for visually impaired people. So we carried out this study to find out whether Namibian online stores have web accessibility guidelines implemented, and whether the store owners are aware of what web accessibility and assistive technologies are. And now we'll be moving on to the research objectives of the study. We had two research objectives for this study. The first objective was to run the websites of Namibian online stores on a web accessibility tool to determine whether they do adhere to web accessibility guidelines. The second objective was to assess whether Namibian online store owners have an understanding and are familiar with the terms web accessibility and assistive technologies, and whether these have been implemented on their online stores. Now we'll move on to the research approach that was followed for our study, or that we followed for our study. So for our first research objective, which was to run Namibian online stores on a web accessibility tool to determine their adherence to web accessibility guidelines, we used the WAVE tool. So the reason that we selected the WAVE tool was because it is the most prominent tool used for determining adherence to web accessibility. The results that it returns are also presented in a structured manner, and it subscribes to the current guidelines, which are Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1. So in the table, this slide, we see 7 Namibian online stores. So we found these 7 online stores using the Google search engine, and then in the second column, we just have links to the online stores. And the image that we see on that slide, that is the interface to the WAVE tool, the Web Accessibility Evaluation tool. And the search window that we see there is where we paste the web name, or the link to the website, and we get the results on whether this site adheres to web accessibility guidelines and to what extent the website adheres to the guidelines that would make it easier for people living with disabilities have easier access and navigation on a website. Continuing with the research approach, the second objective that we had was to determine whether online store owners are aware and familiar with web accessibility guidelines and to assistive technologies. So the approach we followed for that, we approached the 7 stores that we had found using the Google search engine, which we mentioned from the previous slide. So we invited these 7 stores for interviews. We selected these stores purposively, and this was done on the basis that the participants that would have to interview should be an owner of and are operating a Namibian online store. They are available to be interviewed and they have consented to take part in the study. So 3 of the store owners, of the 7 store owners that we approached, consented to be interviewed. So we followed up with the other 4 but never got responses, and we moved on with the 3 that had consented. So we conducted interviews with the 3 participants, each lasting for about 45 minutes long. 2 we carried out using Microsoft Teams, and 1 was done telephonically. The results or the data that we got from the interviews that we collected from interviews, we transcribed them and we analyzed them interpretively. So interpretive analysis is just a way of describing, decoding, and translating the meaning of text, and it is not primarily concerned with the frequency of phenomena. Having run the 7 stores on the Wave tool, we found that the online stores lacked some adherence to web accessibility guidelines, but at the same time, they also had features that offer accessibility and compatibility to assistive technologies. So the results that we got were varying, with some stores having more shortcomings than others. One store only had about 9 errors, meaning that they had 9 features that were not accessible or that were not adhering to web accessibility guidelines, with other stores having more than 300 errors. So we have provided screenshots of these results from the Wave tool in our paper. So if you read through our paper, you'll see exactly how many errors each of the stores had and whether they were also compatible to assistive technologies. From the interviews, the 3 interviews that we carried out, we found that the online store owners portrayed very limited understanding and knowledge of what web accessibility and assistive technologies are. We also found that not all the stores were designed and developed with web accessibility in mind. We inferred this from the responses of the participants. The responses were very vague, and oftentimes they were inaccurate, and they pointed to other terms which were not web accessibility or assistive technologies. The store owners could also not very well explain how web accessibility has been ensured on their websites, and they could also not explain how they have ensured that the features that they have on their website are compatible with assistive technologies. But what is surprising is that from the Wave tool showed that some online stores had high adherence to web accessibility guidelines. As previously mentioned, we said one of the stores only had about 9 errors, with others having up to 300. So we believe that we could attribute this high adherence by some of the online stores to the online store owners making use of web design templates in the design of their online stores. So these could be templates that are already pre-coded with web accessibility guidelines with features that adhere to web accessibility. So our study was limited in that of the 7 potential store owners that we could interview, only 3 consented to the interviews. And it could be that the online stores that had high adherence to web accessibility guidelines as portrayed by the WAVE tool could be the store owners that were not interviewed for the study. We recommend that online store owners are provided with awareness on web accessibility and assistive technologies. So even though most online store owners make use of web design templates, these templates do not always come with all the different web accessibility features, and it would be good if online store owners are able to pick up on the missing features and implement them. So we encourage them to source on information on the different web accessibility guidelines, be updated on the current versions, and also the different web accessibility tools that they can use to check up on what features, what web accessibility features might be lacking from their sites and how they can make their sites compatible to assistive technologies. So should the store owners implement web accessibility and compatibility to assistive technologies, they would be ensuring that people living with disabilities are not left out of the many and varying benefits and conveniences that come with online shopping. So for example, shopping from the comfort of your home, shopping at your own time, even when physical storefronts are closed, and having your goods dropped at your doorstep. Another impact would be that if online store owners adhere to web accessibility guidelines and compatibility to assistive technologies, they would not only be reaching out to people that do not have disabilities or that are not living with disabilities, but they would be increasing their customer base by also ensuring that people that are living with disabilities have the pleasure of accessing their sites with ease and with minimal barriers, and that they are able to navigate the site and complete their purchases. In conclusion, we believe that some of the online stores could do a better job at adhering to the web accessibility tools as portrayed by the results. We also feel that there should be an introduction on web accessibility guidelines within the education sector and for its inclusion in the learning objectives of different web design courses in the curriculums of these courses. And we inferred this from the results where the participants mentioned that they were not aware of web accessibility as it was not something that was introduced to them at the school level. So this can be done from primary, secondary, higher levels since coding is now being introduced into primary schools. We also believe that web accessibility should not only be limited to online stores, but it should also be extended to websites such as those in education, especially during COVID when learners might have had trouble trying to access their content and complete assessments, and also to public service delivery sites which offer different citizen-centric needs. We also believe that web developers should be provided with training on the needs of people living with disabilities, and also the people living with disabilities should be trained on how to easily navigate websites that are web accessible. Further studies could look at investigating web accessibility of other types of Namibian websites, and also looking at the use and uptake of assistive technologies in Namibia. Another area that could be looked at would be to explore the good practices from developing nations such as those in Europe, just to see how have they implemented web accessibility, what can we emulate, what is relevant to our context and what is not relevant. So thank you very much for your time. I now invite questions and your valuable feedback.
Thank you for sharing this presentation. So I have a number of questions that I put in chat, and also I'd like to discuss some issues around web accessibility. So in Europe, for now more than 8 or 9 years, it's a requirement for all public sector websites to be web accessible. So it's not just an issue for stores, it's also a mandatory issue for public sector. So that's something that you may want to keep in mind when you're doing further research in this area. So then the questions are, do you have any understanding of when these specific websites that you targeted were developed and what impact that may have had on web accessibility? So for example, if these websites were in existence for X period of time, when they were developed, there may not have been a general awareness of web accessibility, and how did you factor that into your results? And are most online stores that you are aware of in Namibia developed by web development companies, or are they self-designed internally?
Okay, thank you very much, Miriam. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, you're very clear. Thank you.
Okay, so on the first question on when they were developed, okay, that I'm not sure of, but personally, I only started using the Namibian online stores from, I think, 2020, but I know that the market is very small, so only those 7 that I found, but I believe all of them have been developed maybe after 2015, not so long ago. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, but this is a factor that you may want to factor into your analysis if you're doing further work in this area, that if there's some way of identifying when specific websites were developed, and then it's not that you're making a judgment on whether they are in compliance or not, because it depends if web accessibility is mandatory at a national level or not, but more from the perspective of, well, what impact does that have on the results? It's just another lens that you could use for data analysis. And then my second question was, were the stores, the ones who answered you, did they express any surprise to be invited to an interview about their website? And were the results shared with the targeted websites individually with recommendations on how their websites could be improved during the interview, and to those who didn't respond to the invitation to participate in an interview? Or how were the results communicated back to the target group?
Okay, thank you, Miriam. Okay, on the first question, I think there was also the one on whether they were developed by web companies or internally. So 2 of the stores, the 3 that we managed to interview, 2 of them said they had done it internally on their own. And 1 had indicated that they used a template, with the other one having employed or sourced a web development company to design the store for them. And then the stores were very surprised that we had invited them, because they were not really aware that there would be people interested in doing research within online stores. So they thought that their market was only the customers. So they were quite surprised, and most of them did indicate that, especially the ones that self-designed the websites, that it's not something that they have thought of. But like you indicated in the first question, I really didn't think of asking when they were developed. So maybe really that did have an impact on why they were not aware of web accessibility, because myself, I also only became aware of it last year because of online course that I did. And then with sharing the recommendations, that is actually something that we are yet to do. So that's one of the things that is still outstanding that we need to do, to give the recommendations, and also to give different sources where these companies can get information on web accessibility, being aware of the different features that they could implement. So we are yet to share this with both the interviewed participants and those that we could not get through to. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So one thing that you may want to think about is, as part of community engagement, it may be worthwhile if NUST organized, or in cooperation with other universities, you all organized a short workshop. So it may be an hour. It doesn't have to be something that costs money. It's just a matter of having a room and inviting people and having people who are ready to present content, but having some type of an engagement around web accessibility to create awareness. And this could be offered to, I presume there is a business association in Windhoek, of which different businesses are members. So it may also encourage other businesses to go online, and you could also invite members of the public sector. So that may be something for you to think about, and that could also be part of future research, that you could do an awareness raising exercise with the community, and then sometime later see, well, what impact did having such an exercise have on the results?
Okay, thank you so much, Miriam. Yes, and I see the second question on awareness. Yes, so I like you said we are from the university environment. So being a web development lecturer myself, I know that it's really something that we are lacking on. So both for our information system students, computer science, we do teach them HTML5, but we just talk about web accessibility as something essential, but we do not go deeper into how to code for that. And it's just something that we do in passing and we don't really focus on it. So thank you very much for all the recommendations.
Yeah, and that's something that may be useful also to other higher education institutions, because essentially you are training the future web developers, and most companies wouldn't have the confidence or the skills or the human resources to contemplate organizing a website themselves. So they would probably go to companies or individuals that they know that have the skills. So as part of the higher education institution commitment to the community, it would be interesting if something more could be done in this way, so that in the future, the companies don't have this problem.
Thank you very much.
I thank you very much for sharing this experience. I don't see any further questions for you in chat. So thank you very much. And now we move on to the next presenter. So Yemisi is going to present towards user experience heuristics for engagement and interaction.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Yemisi Oyedele. I am the co-author of this paper. I am from the Nelson Mandela University in South Africa, and I am going to speak about efforts towards user experience heuristics for engagement and interaction. Let us consider the background to this specific project. First of all, we know that more people are adopting ICT products in daily life. In other words, products of information and communication technology. They are primarily intended to fulfill or enable the function of information processing and communication by electronic means, including transmission and display. The value and success of ICT products are associated with the experience, engagement, and interaction that end users have with them. An end user refers to a person who interacts with an ICT product for the primary purpose of meeting their own needs in a given context of use. Therefore, their engagement with ICT products is crucial. Allow me to provide a short overview of end-user engagement and interaction. End-user engagement and interaction with ICT products is a characteristic facet of the overall experience that reflects that the product is not only usable but also engaging. The dimensions of UX engagement and interaction, though separate, are also intertwined during the period of experience. Commonly in the human-computer interaction domain, design rules such as heuristics are used to help understand and design for such experience. In addition, high-level principles help relate heuristics to human knowledge. Examples used for user experience include learnability, visibility, user control, and color guidelines, to name a few. There are a few approaches used to generate a set of heuristics. These include adopting an existing set of heuristics and using a process to create unique or new heuristics. If we are to consider the problem area for the development of heuristics for end-user engagement and interaction of ICT products, we have to think about how the end-user engagement and interaction are designed for and measured. Commonly, behavior-related metrics are used. Such metrics include number of users, number of new users, number of sessions per user, number of views, average session duration, bounce rate, number of likes, and number of comments, to mention a few. However, the end user's engagement and interaction has more than one dimension. Though separate, the dimensions are intertwined during the period of experience. Yet, other dimensions of the end user's engagement, such as the cognitive and emotional dimensions, receive minimal focus during heuristics formation. On this screen is a picture of a young man using his mobile phone while in an online meeting via his laptop. To the owners of the meeting, the engagement metrics shows that the young man joined the session and is engaged, whereas his emotions and cognition are not for the laptop, but his mobile phone. This paper focuses on the user experience, engagement, and interaction, which holistically refers to the emotional, cognitive, and behavioral engagement that end users have with an ICT product. This paper aims to first determine the parts of a process for the development of UX heuristics for end users' engagement and interaction, and second, identify UX heuristics for engagement and interaction with ICT products using the heuristics development process. In order to develop a generic heuristic development process and generate heuristics for UX engagement and interaction, we used qualitative data collection and analysis technique. This involved the use of search strategy on databases such as Google Scholar, Science Direct, and Web of Science. This was done between 2018 and 2019 for collection of heuristics development approaches and design guidelines and principles related to user engagement, user interaction, and user experience. Also, thematic analysis was conducted on the findings, then aligned to the dimensions of UX engagement and interaction. At the time the search was done, we found few publications with numerous duplications. After removing duplicates and those already used in meta-analysis in other articles, 3 methodological approaches were included for final analysis, namely, the 3-phase process for creating heuristics for specific application domains, a 6-stage methodology for heuristics development, and an 8-stage methodology for developing usability and UX heuristics. The first 2 phases of the 3-phase process were adapted for the formation of the generic heuristic development process. This is because the elements of the phases were found to be most relevant to inform the first level tier of the heuristic development process. The generic heuristic development process we developed has 8 steps. First, review relevant literature. Then name high-level heuristics according to the themes identified. Next is to tailor existing heuristics to fit the generic ICT product. Then group the high-level heuristic names based on the sub-dimensions of UX engagement and interaction. When done, there is need to review the grouping of the sub-dimensions. Then apply a scenario to validate the high-level heuristics and analyze the scenario results. The heuristic development process could be restarted from an appropriate task when the need for modifications of literature, themes, heuristics, a validation tool, or other parts of the process arises. In this study, literature for the specific application domain on user experience, usability, user engagement fields was extensively investigated. The literature findings revealed 4 sets of guidelines and principles from the fields. It is important to note that the low number of sets of guidelines goes to show how the area of designing for end-user engagement and interaction with ICT products is still emerging. Themes from the literature findings were awarded into high-level heuristic names with descriptions. Each of the guidelines and principles was coded for easy referencing. The heuristics and descriptions were then aligned to the dimensions of the UX engagement and interaction with the ICT product. The high-level heuristics are grouped under corresponding sub-dimensions of UX engagement and interactions. As you see on the screen, the major dimensions are emotional, cognitive, and behavioral. The sub-dimensions now varies according to either the dual levels or the holistic level. At the dual level, we have the emotion cognitive, we have the emotion behavioral, then we have the cognitive behavioral. At the holistic level, which is at the center, we have the combo of the emotional, cognitive, and behavior. Where necessary, the high-level heuristics were moved under different sub-dimensions in order to make more sense. This was done based on the subjective interpretation of the researchers. Using a scenario, we illustrated the applicability of the heuristic development process and generated UX heuristics for engagement and interaction. The scenario focused on a situation where there is a need to improve a part of the way end users engage and interacted with a generic ICT product. From the outcome of the scenario, most of the heuristics support at least 2 UX engagement and interaction dimensions. This shows that designing for an engaging experience involves the consideration of either the singular, dual, or holistic categories of the UX engagement and interaction. The singular categories of the UX engagement and interaction heuristics are either only the emotional dimension, only the cognitive dimension, or only the behavioral dimension. These categories can be helpful when the ICT product designers and developers are focusing on understanding or improving an isolated aspect of the way end users engage and interact with the product. The dual categories are combinations of 2 dimensions of the UX engagement and interaction, namely emotional cognitive, emotional behavioral, and behavioral cognitive. The dual category heuristics can be helpful for situations where designers are concerned with more than one aspect of the end user engagement with the product. In conclusion, a lesson we learned from this research is that the assigning of heuristics as well as the review of the heuristics are subjective across different researchers. Also, during the early phases of illustrating the generic heuristic development process, we found that there are limited yet non-uniform UX heuristics targeted at the end user's engagement and interaction with ICT products. Nonetheless, the heuristics generated in this paper can serve as rules of thumb for decision making during the design process for the holistic engagement an end user has with an ICT product. The heuristic development process can be beneficial for designers and developers of interactive and social ICT products. Finally, just some recommendation. With the ever-changing nature and adoption rate of ICT products and services across different contexts across the world, new heuristics for end-user engagement and interaction might be needed to be formulated as part of future research work and applied in different contexts to assess its applicability and relevance. Examples of specific application areas of ICT include social media technologies, online education platforms, and mobile technologies. We thank you for your attention and we welcome any questions.
So Yemisi, I've pushed some feedback into the chat so you can see it as we're going along. So thank you very much for a very clear presentation of your results with very nice visuals. So based on your research to date, what are some of the sociocultural differences that can be taken into account in the context of user design and use of heuristics? And then secondly, if you could provide some insight into the next steps in your overall research.
Thank you very much for the question and also for the opportunity to answer the question. In terms of the first question, which is to share some of the social cultural differences that should be taken into account, it's something that we'll have to look into and explore as part of our future research work. And the second question, which is to provide some insight into the next steps of this research. We've shared some of it during the pre-recorded presentation, which is to explore the use of the heuristic development process in different platforms. So one of the areas we're looking into is social media technologies. Other areas could include online education platforms and mobile technologies. Thank you once again. I hope I answered the two questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. So you're at an early stage in your research now.
At the moment, we've almost done, or actually let's just say done. We're just trying to write up, do some write up.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So thank you very much for your presentation.
So I can't give much details at this stage.
Yeah, that's fine. So thank you very much for your presentation. I don't see any questions for you in chat, so we'll move on to the next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miriam.
So Samuel's going to present Impact of Technophobia on the Digital Divide, a preliminary case study in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa.
Good day, everyone. My name is Samuel Faloye. I'm from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Johannesburg campus, South Africa. I'm here to present the paper titled Impact of Technophobia on the Digital Divide, preliminary case study in the province of South Africa. This study is part of my doctoral study. The data for the study was obtained last year in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa. Just a brief background about the digital divide. The digital divide has been described as the gap between individuals with assets and skills to use information and technology, those without such access and skills. Literature points to the existence of a deep digital divide in South Africa. In an attempt to bridge it, the South African government and other organizations are focused on measures such as provision of technological infrastructure, basic technological resources, and skills acquisitions. In addition, recent research has also focused on provision of technological infrastructure, basic technological resources, and skills acquisitions. However, the digital divide still persists, highlighting the need to consider human factors as a tool to bridge it. And technophobia is such one factor. Technophobia has been described as an aversive feeling towards technology of various forms. These aversive feelings often lead to avoidance of technologies of various forms. In the recent years, technophobia has received more attention due to the infusion of technologies into our everyday life. The notion that technophobia is only associated with adults has been disapproved. Current research shows that technophobia is experienced by around 50% of all population across different age categories. Due to its impact on individual quality of life, technophobia has been regarded by many as a serious clinical condition comparable in severity to other phobias. Individuals with high levels of technophobia are less likely to adopt technologies due to their mental resistance to all forms of technologies. Therefore, technophobia impact on technology adoption calls for an investigation into its relationship with the digital divide. The objectives of this study are as follows: to understand individual background characteristics that influence technophobia, understand how technophobia impacts the digital divide. This study employed explanatory research design and also a quantitative research approach was implemented. The target populations for the study were members of the public in Eastern Cape province who are potential users of technology. The members were further categorized as young adults, which fall between age 18 to 35, the middle age adults, which fall between age 36 to 35, and the older adults, which fall between age 56 and above. For the sampling, the purposive sampling techniques was used to select the sample. The sample size was 384. The data obtained was analyzed through SPSS. This study employed two conceptual frameworks. One is the Technophobia Assessment Framework by KwaZulu-Natal, and also the Digital Divide Framework. For the Technophobia Framework, Peter researched large scale to measure technophobia in general sense. This study therefore employed Technophobia model developed by KwaZulu-Natal. The framework was developed in line with etymology of technophobia as well as several definitions given by different authors. The framework conceives of technophobia as fear, discomfort, and anxiety towards various forms of technology. However, the framework was aligned with the digital divide framework. The technophobia model used 16 items to measure the 5 dimensions of technophobia. These were the technoparanoia, technofear, technoanxiety, cybernetic revolt, communication device avoidance. Based on the review of literature, the 5 constructs of the technophobia model appear to be the determinant of technology acceptance. Therefore, in this study, we propose that these constructs play a vital role in access to technology and skills. In addition, socio-economic and socio-demographic factors have been considered as moderating factors of technophobia. For this reason, age, gender, employment status, and educational level were considered as moderating factors in this study. For the digital divide framework uses 3 constructs to explain the factors pertaining to the digital divide, which are the digital access divide, which focus on inequality in access to information technology, the digital capability divide, which relates to inequality in the skills required to use technology, and the digital outcome divide, which focuses on inequality in individuals' productivity. In the context of this study, 2 of the constructs were used in this study, since individual productivity relates to both assets and skills. The constructs used were data asset divide and data capability divide. Based on the result obtained, no significant differences in the level of technophobia across the gender. However, level of technophobia varies with respect to the participant age, educational and employment level. Educational level and employment level were positively correlated with the level of technophobia among all age groups, although the young adults group showed a low level of technophobia regardless of gender, education, and employment status. A high level of technophobia was found among the participants with no formal employment and low educational level across all age groups. However, low to mid-level technophobia was observed among participants in the young adult group. Further observation revealed high level of technophobia among older male and female participants than the young and middle-aged adult groups. This result suggests that age-influenced level of technophobia, with older adults being more anxious than young and middle-aged ones. Significant differences were also observed between the participant employment status, educational qualification, and level of technophobia. People in formal employment are more likely to have access to technology than those in informal jobs. Findings also show that the majority of the participants with high level of technophobia lack access to technologies such as computers and the internet, particularly those in the older and middle age group with no formal education and formal employment. In addition, they demonstrated low competency with the use of automated teller machine due to high level of technophobia. Finally, participants in the middle age and young adult group demonstrated high competency level. These were participants with formal employment and high educational qualification who showed no signs of technophobia. The study results suggest that age, education level, and employment status influence technophobia, and that technophobia impacts access and an individual competency level. The negative attitude and anxiety demonstrated by the participants indicates that in encouraging technology adoption and enabling people to realize its benefit, strategies to manage anxiety and negative attitude will be beneficial. For this reason, it is recommended that technological skills development programs should be developed for anxious and cognitive technophobes and uncomfortable users. This recommendation is based on the notion that a lack of experience often results in high level of anxiety and negative attitudes. In addition, we recommend psychological interventions such as coaching and counseling to address technophobia in South Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samuel. So I've pushed the comments and discussion points into the chat so you can see them as we're going along. So this was a clear presentation on a topic that has global relevance. How do you consider, or do you consider any link between technophobia and an insufficient consideration of user engagement and interaction in application design? And then the second question was, how do you think the general public can be encouraged to appropriately engage with technology? Because we have two extremes. We have people that are attached to their mobile phone and technology 100% of the time, in that they're no longer capable of having a conversation with anybody, and they go out for dinner and they spend the whole time playing with their phone, to the other side where we have people that need to use technology but don't feel confident. And then this is becoming more of a problem for marginalized groups as more services move to primarily online development. So in your presentation, you recommended that skills development programs be developed, but who would be responsible for this? So in Ireland, for example, there was a movement more than a decade ago where the government decided that it was important that, in this case, it was targeting older demographics and retired people that may not have used technology in their work environment previously, and in response to communication with their families who may be in different geographic areas, and the ability to engage with public services, that they should be offered the opportunity to upskill. And they ran a series of courses which were provided with no charge to elderly people so that they could get a certificate in digital skills. And it was represented as a way that people could communicate with their family and how technology could be useful to them. So what do you think could be done in your context? Thank you.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yes, you're very clear. Thank you.
Okay, first I'd like to apologize for the poor audio. So in the full paper, we made a number of recommendations, and our recommendations were based on the literature. And one of the recommendation is the skill acquisition, and also psychological interventions, such as coaching and counseling. To address technophobia, the findings from this study will be presented to the Department of Education and also South African government. So if they're making their decision, they may consider our findings and implement those strategies. However, those strategies can be based on the recommendation provided in the study. So with that, hopefully, the issue of digital divide in South Africa be bridged to some extent. Thank you.
Martin, you have a question that I see now in the chat, both for Yemisi and for Samuel.
Okay, let me just quickly go to my chat and see. Okay, do you consider the problem may be a response to insufficient consideration of user engagement and interaction application design?
No, they're the questions I asked you, but if you go down further, oh no, they didn't go through to you. Hang on a minute and I'll forward the ones that Martin said.
Okay, whilst he's hanging on, probably
Yeah.
I could also maybe just ask them now.
Yeah, please.
What I wanted to understand from the presentation was, I noticed in the framework that you presented, you indicated the socio-demographic factors and then the socio-economic factors. I was wondering whether maybe if you also consider the socio-cultural factors, such as individualism or collectivism.
Exactly.
Some other societies, people are more individualistic, and then in some societies, they are more collectivist. So depending on the society, if it is a more collective society, the influence of those who use these devices influence others to use. But in the individualistic society, that influence isn't there, whether that was also factored beyond the social and then the economic factors.
Okay, thank you for the contribution. In our study, at a later stage, we realized that, okay, based on the literature, some other factors also influences technophobia. For instance, the personal belief, the cultural ethics, and all that. However, in the context of the study, those were not considered. And we highlighted that as part of the limitation of the study.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Samuel, where does this go next? Is this a standalone study or is this part of a bigger exercise?
Okay, thank you, Miriam. As I said, this is part of my doctoral study. At the moment, I'm doing the report because that was obtained from the 6 provinces out of the 9 provinces of South Africa. So I'm the final stage of the study.
Okay, thank you very much. So Martin, would you like to ask the question you had for Yemisi? I put that in the chat so that she can see it.
Okay, hi Miriam. I don't know if I can answer.
Yeah, please. I think
I said
Martin
I
lost the connection.
in the chat.
Yeah.
All right. So the question is, you made mention of iteration as part of the heuristic development process. How many iterations are taken in your research? So when we were illustrating the applicability of the heuristic development process, I think we went, we did that whole process at least twice. And each time we were just trying to see where the heuristic will fit based on the scenario we were working with. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to thank all the presenters. So this was a very interesting session, and there was actually quite a lot of overlap from one in terms of the main challenges that have been addressed by society from one presentation to another. So they fitted together very well. I'd like to thank you all for the preparation you did for the session and for your engagement during the session. So we've now come to the end of the track today. And tomorrow, the sessions are primarily focused on e-agriculture. So looking at applications, issues, and case studies to do with both high precision agriculture and ICT adoption issues. So I hope you have a very nice evening and I look forward to your participation tomorrow. Thank you. Goodbye.